Hi, welcome to the AIM on MS&T podcast. If this is your first time listening to our podcast, first off, welcome. Second, AIM stands for Academia, Industry, and Military, which are the main sectors that make up Central Florida's modeling, simulation, and training community. This podcast is brought to you in part by DSI. DSI invites you to the 8th Annual Military Virtual Training and Simulation Summit on February 5th and 6th at the UCF Fairwinds Alumni Center in Orlando. Visit milsim.dsigroup.org to register. I'm your host, Kate Finkel, and in today's episode, we have Mary Trier, President of Capital Communications, taking over as a guest host. Mary will be talking with Brigadier General Christine Beeler, Program Executive Officer for the Army's Program Executive Office for Simulation Training and Instrumentation, also known as PEO STRI. So, without further ado, the floor is all yours.
Hi, I'm Mary Trier, guest hosting today for our first episode of 2025. Welcome back from the holidays, and thanks for joining us for today's episode. General Beeler, it's a real pleasure to have you with us and the Team Orlando audience today. As always, as an alum of PEO STRI, STRICOM, and PM Trade, I'm happy to be back with what I still call family. Welcome.
Hey, Mary, thank you so very much. You and the Team Orlando community. 2024 was very exciting, and I'm looking forward to 2025, and what a great way to start off the year.
Absolutely. General Beeler, before we talk about PEO STRI, you've had a fascinating Army career, and many of our listeners are familiar with your story. But for those who are not, can we start with that? We'd like to know, how did you choose this path, and what does it mean to serve in uniform, and how did you end up in the epicenter for MS&T?
Well, that's a very long story that I will attempt to shorten, having realized that I'm now at 33 years in the Army. I don't know where the time went. You know, I was, like most folks, just a kid doing their thing in high school and getting ready to go to college, because that's what kids in my neighborhood did. And I had friends who were very much focused on military service. They had parents who were still serving or who had just finished up service. I've got a little bit of service in my background. If I think about my grandfather, World War II, Korea, my father in Vietnam, certainly a great cosmos environment of folks who have served in uniform. But more importantly, I was very much involved in serving in the community, whether it was at church, whether it was in high school, whether it was other activities. So when I went off to college, I didn't have that. I kind of lost that grounding, as it were, and I found that in a couple of areas. One in particular was in the Army ROTC program. So I was in the band hanging out with some friends, and they were in the ROTC program, and of course they go, "Hey, we're going rappelling on Saturday, do you want to go?" I'm like, sure. Where do you go rappelling in downtown Boston? Well, football field. I'm like, I live at the football field. What time are you getting up? Not too early, 9 o'clock. I'm like, I could do 9 o'clock. So I started hanging out with them, getting involved in those activities. I found out that I enjoyed that environment, community of people who care about you and your success, and who you can then help care about others and their success, really appealed to me. And that's how I ended up joining the ROTC program. Long story short, I got active duty. I got to go to Germany. Started off as a maintenance officer. I really enjoyed that, but you know, as a certain point, you have to grow up out of doing into leading through other leaders. And I had always been very interested in the acquisition community. So when that opportunity presented itself, I said, sure, I'm interested. And they sent me a letter, and I've been doing acquisitions now since 2001. So it's been a lot of fun. And as most people know, I spent most of my time doing contracting. So people are like, well, how did you end up being a PEO? I said, well, I did do some program management as a junior major, and then I got a chance to teach program management and systems engineering. You're like, but you don't have a science degree. Yeah, no, systems engineering is about integration and bringing all the smart people together. And that's what I do. I bring the smart people together. You think about the folks here in Orlando, whether they're industry, whether they're academia, the folks in the government, or all the people who have a great interest in seeing the Army succeed in the training community, particularly through modeling and simulation. I can't help but be in the right place to bring folks together. And so that's really how I ended up in the epicenter for modeling and simulation. I'm good at bringing the really, really smart people together and driving toward achieving things for the Army.
Well, that's great. Now that we know a little bit more about you, let's talk about PEO STRI. Could you share some of the organization's history, its current mission, and how important that is for the Army today?
So PEO STRI, I've been schooled on PEO STRI lately we've hit our 50th year, technically, if you go back to the origins of PM for training devices. So back in 1974, we are the oldest PM in the United States Army.
I believe that.
Training is important, obviously. And so we've just celebrated that in December by a ribbon cutting ceremony as we are installing a piece of Army hardware on this naval installation, a piece of artillery, an M2A1, which is a 105 millimeter howitzer. Saw a lot of service in Vietnam, so very important to soldiers' survival, and obviously had to learn how to train on it. Now we have one here on Naval Support Activity Orlando. So we are very excited about that, and we're very thankful for our naval partners to allow us to have a piece of Army equipment on the installation to salute as we drive by on our way into post. But they've been here for a long time. PM Trade moved to Orlando in '76, and then into the De Flores complex here at Naval Support Activity under the auspices of STRICOM in '92. And then it evolved into PEO STRI, Simulation, Training, and Instrumentation, in 2002. So all of those changes over the course of time have enabled this organization to refine really what its return on investment is for the Army and to deliver critical training technology and capabilities all the way from training the individual soldier to training generals across the globe. And we're certainly on the cusp of the next version of that activity as we think about modernization of both our synthetic training environment, but really how that connects live, virtual, and constructive. We're going to have live, virtual, constructive everywhere, every time, all the time, so that when we need it, we can tap into it. And I think that's the vision that certainly Army Futures Command sees in the synthetic training environment.
That's awesome. Seeing that mission come to fruition is really exciting. There have been many, many advancements along the way, but it's exciting to see it all come to be.
As we think about convergence in this space, we've spent a lot of time putting good products out. Some of them are coming to the end of their life cycle. Some of them will be able to modernize into the future and continue to plug them into the network. But systems of systems and families of training systems, I think, is really where we're headed, because that's the way we can really look at reducing the overhead burden on the Army and soldiers instead of having a whole variety of products that are not necessarily prompt and programmed for continued sustainment across the future. How do we continue to deliver those products or capabilities along those lines with a smaller overhead, which then enables the Army to spend money on other really critical technologies as well?
Definitely an important mission. Looking back on 2024, what would you say some of STRI's most noteworthy accomplishments were, aside from the fact that you became the PEO?
Well, that was certainly noteworthy for me. This is my first assignment to Florida, but really, PEO STRI as an organization has been delivering a lot of capability, and 2024 was exceptional in terms of where we've moved in the modernization program. So I mentioned earlier the synthetic training environment. In 2024, we delivered our first variants into the field for the reconfigurable virtual trainer. So that's been very helpful, and we continue to deploy those assets as we get more and more soldier feedback to continue to develop the ability to do collective training across multiple platforms that soldiers and company commanders and brigade commanders and battalion commanders, right, can connect all of their assets together and kind of go through the crawl, walk, run concept of collective execution of their mission before they spend all the money to bring all of their equipment out into a field training environment, before they bring in all the ammunition, so that when they do go out to the field, they can be very specific, deliberate, and effective in their actual training in the dirt, as it were. Additionally, we've got a very broad mandate from the Chief of Staff to continue to deliver next-gen constructive, which is the simulation that drives or will drive all of our wargaming at the national level and even down at the battalion and brigade level, as we continue to bring all of the individual parts and pieces of that system. I think of it as an ecosystem of systems. So we're bringing in the different models from already developed platforms so that we represent them inside this system. We're bringing in a core version of software that we can then take best of breed from around the Army and really around our industry partners basis to be able to represent capabilities, both friendly and threat, inside our portfolio. I think that's going to provide us with more realism in our training. And then if you think about how we already also own the test environment and the threat environment, we're really able to bring all of those capabilities together to form hopefully a very seamless way of going from testing a piece of Army kit in the field to then replicating that inside the constructive environment, so that when a general says, I want to employ an electronic warfare capability, it's difficult to employ that in reality. Planes and other people don't really like it when you disrupt the signature airspace. So being able to replicate that for real inside the system will be very helpful in terms of training people, A, what to expect, but B, how to actually use that capability and what it will generate on the ground against the threat. So all of those things have kind of recently come together out at Vanguard 24, where we were able to take not only our threat system, battle management computer platform, but tie that into our virtual constructive command center, which is kind of controls all the Blue Force stuff inside the simulation, and then feed that in with our electronic warfare training tactical proficiency trainer to actually see, both from Blue 4 and Red 4 perspective, what you can do inside the simulation that then actually transmits to something that physically happens on the ground in the training space. So Vanguard was an exceptional opportunity this past year as well. And then the work we do for ATEC, that's been phenomenal too. In fact, just recently, they took possession of what they describe as a world-class accelerated vehicle durability testing simulator, which is basically this huge platform that I can put multi-axle vehicles on and shake and bake that vehicle to see how it survives a terrain environment without needing all the terrain to drive it on. And that's been a 5-year endeavor, and I think that's going to enable Aberdeen Proving Grounds to really look at the type of vehicles that we're developing today and test them to the edge of their capability so that we know exactly how it's going to perform under the most arduous of conditions.
How much reliance is on the simulated testing, and how do you determine when the simulation is adequate?
Yeah, you're asking a great technical question to the non-technical person, but I'll give you my non-technical person answer. When the test community has high enough confidence in the fidelity of the models and the simulation to replicate reality, and we can prove that. I used to work on missiles, so you would take the simulation, you use the simulation, and every now and again you'd fire a shot to validate that your simulation and your model accurately reflected reality. I think that's where they're headed, right? Is what, from a policy perspective, what can we do through the simulation using high fidelity models to validate those test results? And then how often do we actually need to blow things up? Because blowing things up is really, really expensive. Right. And some of the stuff we're blowing up is really, really expensive. From everything I've listened to, the test community itself is asking those questions and coming up with those policies on where they're going to see that line.
It's very good to see it coming to fruition, and saving money and resources is excellent.
And there's just some things we can't test as readily as we would like. There are a few places that we can do some of the high fidelity physical testing that we would need, and so you have to figure out how else do we do that. So sure. Absolutely.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about 2024 before we begin to talk about the future?
2 things, really. One of those is 2024 was the first year for our product lead, enterprise transformation and integration, which as an organization is going to help us drive convergence. It's going to help us bring our own DevSecOps platform to fruition, which will enable us to test all the best of breed in our environment before we deploy it to the soldier in the field. And then that will maximize our ability to do software reuse, modern software development, agile processes. And as we look at 25, we're on a good glide path to continue that development, which is all about delivering a really strong return on investment and reducing the overall dollar cost of developing these simulations and these models to use in the field. And then our STAR program, our Agile Acquisition Response Team, is a group we've brought together to solve quick problems and get quick wins in prototyping and development. And we're seeing their activity very much right now in the synthetic training environments live training systems portfolio, where we've developed prototypes and have them deployed at training centers right now of capabilities we haven't been able to do. And those are mostly in the throwable. So what does that mean, throwable? That means like grenades. We haven't really been able to train grenade. How do you react to a grenade? And now we actually have a grenade you can throw, and it makes all of the miles gear go off appropriately. We've got some mortars and we've got claymore mines, and that stuff has never been available to train, where it actually creates an effect not only in the simulation, but on the soldiers, so that they have to really employ good battlefield technique, tactic, and procedure that they've never had to do before. So we're very excited there in those product lines too.
Excellent. So do you see any organizational priority changes for PEO STRI in the coming year?
Our priority is to continue to deliver the products and services we have, but think about it in a new way so that we're not just focused on today, but we're looking at what do the funding streams look like in the future? How can we be more effective in deployment of software updates or hardware refresh? And the way we're going to be able to do that is, instead of running around the world with floppy disks or hard drives to update stuff, is move things to the cloud. Create an architecture that enables us to refresh our product lines as the weapons platforms and capabilities in the field refresh. So that's really the biggest focus, along with next-gen constructive. The Chief of Staff has told us that is his priority, to get a theater and core constructive training environment out, and that's where we're going to drive a lot of our efforts to.
Excellent. How about the people of PEO STRI, your workforce, your leadership, and the culture? And perhaps a little bit about the partners and partnerships such as Team Orlando.
Well, first of all, our priorities, number one, is to invest in our workforce and continue to cultivate and hire the right talent in the community and really from around the globe, whether you think of that in terms of bringing on an industry partner who's got a particular skill set, or working with the University of Central Florida, who's got a phenomenal development program in the modeling and simulation and engineering community that we've been very blessed to be able to tap into and kind of get that free flowing of ideas with the student community, as well as the crusty old engineers who have been doing this for a long time, right? I think bringing those two parties together just generates such energy that the folks who have been doing this a while learn something new, and the folks who have not been doing this stuff for a while understand how to work the system. Because working for the department or developing stuff and being on contract with the Department of the Army or the Department of Defense is not for the faint of heart. We do not make it easy. We keep trying. Acquisition reform is always high on our list of things to do. But as we continue to have open dialogue, whether it's through our procurement acquisition lead time events, of which we have one coming up very, very soon, and we hold them every month, that's a great opportunity to have that dialogue. But fostering that kind of relationship is essential to our success in this space. The other area we're really, really focusing on in terms of investing in our resources is having that open dialogue with all of our industry partners. I've made transparency a high priority for our organization. Now, clearly, things that are in some variation of a source selection, those things become no longer available to discuss. But stuff that's not there, stuff that's either we're early to or we're thinking about, I mean, those are great discussion areas to continue to further the dialogue.
Can you talk a little bit about how industry can interact with you and PEO STRI and why it's important?
So communication is absolutely important. We will not be the central point for delivering innovation, but we absolutely want to be the group of folks who encourages innovation. So whether it's the procurement acquisition, lead time events, which you'll get a very inch deep and a mile wide understanding of what's available, what procurement activities we've got going on. I think there are a lot of other opportunities, whether it's ITSIC, which we just finished up, which was phenomenal. I saw all kinds of different applications of models and simulation in the training environment, as well as things that can apply to the testing community. We have TSIS coming up in June. That'll be another opportunity. But every time we have a request for information, we are aware that we're not going to get everybody's big answer in those. But if you want to have a follow-on meeting to have further discussion, you absolutely should ask for it. Our industry days that are about actual contract activity, those are really, really important because it's an opportunity to deep dive that particular problem set that we're looking at. The work we do in the Tech Grove with the innovation demonstrations and some of the competitions, I think that is a really phenomenal opportunity. And then lastly, I would say if you can't find a way to have the conversation you want to have through those events, then absolutely reach out. I've never had a problem taking an inquiry from an industry partner. What I would ask is don't just say, hey, here's my entire portfolio of all the stuff that I could do for you, but I understand you have this problem, and here's how we're thinking about it. And that would be a great way to start that conversation.
That's great advice. Thank you for that. You talked a little bit about the Tech Grove, which is an outgrowth of the Navy's Tech Bridge, and it really expanded Team Orlando's collaboration here. Can you talk about some of the projects and collaborations that you at PEO STRI are doing with some of the other service?
I think the value of Tech Grove is listening to what each service is doing in that space. So I went over and learned a whole lot about what the Navy has done or is doing in a particular area of need. And I thought, well, we have the same problem. Why aren't we just piggybacking off of this activity instead of having our own activity? Why aren't we more collaborative in this space? And so I think as individual programs, it's really hard to say, well, we're piggybacking together in this area. We're closer with the Marine Corps, obviously. PM Tracis and the Army, we're both a bunch of ground pounders, and so our equipment and our technique, tactic, and procedure tend to be similar, so we're able to partner in that space. But they are looking at different ways of attaining services and training capabilities than perhaps we are, given they have 135,000 folks that they've got to worry about, and we have 1 million soldiers. So size and scale are a little bit different, but it's always great to see what the other services are doing. And now we've got the Space Force in town as well, and they are going to, I think in 25, really enhance what we have going on in the Tech Grove as they try to understand how to really use the knowledge base of this community to help improve space operations and, more importantly, space training operations, which is really difficult to do on the ground. There's a lot of things up in the space that we don't want to break, but you still got to figure out how do you train in that environment. And so modeling and simulation obviously is going to be very big in their area as well.
And our last question, what would you say are the kinds of characteristics and skill sets and capabilities that we are looking for in our MS&T industry?
Modeling and simulation represents reality. So first you have to have a firm understanding of reality, what makes things work, to then turn them into something not physical, but operates on the same space, whether it's a model of a weapons platform or a simulation that connects different weapons platforms together to avoid cost of going to the field. So those types of folks are people who understand the basics of engineering. They're creative. We want creative types. We do a lot of work in graphic design because humans gather information through all of its senses, visual being a huge one. So if we have poor graphic quality in our models and our simulations that our soldiers are operating in, all we get is, really, you can't even get me Fortnite version 1? I got to operate off a green screen, right? I mean, that's not helpful. And so we need arts people. We need people creative in that space. Now, we're going to predominantly bring those folks in through our industry partners. People who understand software engineering. People who have got Scrum Master and Agile product management experience and training, which is a very big shift from the way we've done software development in the past, which is I give you a project and 3 years later you develop something and you drop it off on my desk and it works or it doesn't work. And if it works, great, but it's probably now outdated because technology and development is moving so fast. So people who understand that area. The folks who are really working hard on AI and machine learning, right? How can we get the machine to do the coding faster? How can we get the machine to visualize and replicate what the Blue 4 would do or the Red 4, or even more difficult to understand is how do neutrals and civilians on the battlefield react? I mean, wouldn't it be great to be able to collect all the data that we've seen in the last 25 years of conflicts around the globe and understand how population and people activity really have a flow to it? It's very fluid. Migration statistics are very much like fluid dynamics, is my understanding. And so being able to kind of visualize that and pour that back into the training systems is really important. But people got to start at the basic blocking and tackling of engineering and math and science and STEM and the arts, because those are the areas that generate the innovation in this space. So we're looking for those folks over the next 5 years, and basic folks who understand how to run an organization, right? Management, people who understand how to deliver a collective team of subject matter experts to actually produce something and deliver it to be used, and then how do you iterate on that? Those are skills that will stand the test of time, both for our industry partners and for us in government. And then academia, you're the guys who are training all this stuff into your education programs, but I think there's room for tech schools and development in that space. I think we have to figure out how do we enable all of our educational and training opportunities to bring in the talent.
So it's been a pleasure hosting this episode of AIM on MS&T. Thank you, General Beeler. We really appreciate you being our guest today. We'll see you around the ecosystem, and back to you, Kate.
Jumping back in, I want to thank our guest Brigadier General Christine Beeler and Mary Trier for hosting this episode. For everyone listening, to keep you updated on future events in the modeling and simulation community, check out our website, teamorlando.org. You'll also find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook for more recent news and upcoming events. If you're interested in sponsoring an episode of AIM on MS&T or being a featured guest, please reach out to Team Orlando News. The link will be below. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to follow the AIM on MS&T podcast on your platform of choice, and we will see you in the next one. Bye!